Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're diving into something that feels like it's changing so rapidly. The world of artificial intelligence. It's moving so fast that it can be hard to keep up, not just with the tech itself, but like the implications of it all?
It really is moving at an incredible pace. And that's precisely why we're here, to take a closer look at some of these key things that come up as AI becomes, more a part of our everyday lives. Really, I think our goal today is to understand the intricacies, the complexities of it, and why these things really matter as AI shapes, the world around us.
Yeah, this isn't some kind of far off theoretical discussion either, right? We're already seeing AI influence things you and I encounter every day. Like, just think about how healthcare is being done in some places, or the way, financial companies are assessing risk, or even how it's being used in parts of the legal system. Like, AI is here, and it's making real decisions about our lives.
It really is. It's already woven into the fabric of so much of what we do. I mean, think about it. From the algorithms that decide what shows up in your news feed to the AI that's assisting doctors in making diagnoses. These technologies they're already having a real impact, a tangible impact. So understanding these considerations, it's not just for the engineers or the people who are building these systems. It's for anyone living in a world that's increasingly shaped by AI, and that means all of us listening right now.
So where do we even begin? I know we're going to touch on some fundamental, really important ideas today. Can you give us like a quick overview of where we're headed in this deep dive?
Yeah, sure. So we're gonna explore a few core areas. Like first off, we're gonna talk about how do we make sure that AI is fair, that it doesn't end up being discriminatory. We'll also talk about accountability. When AI systems make mistakes or maybe even do something intentionally harmful, who's responsible? That's a big one. Then we'll delve into transparency, like how do we make sure we understand how these AI systems are making decisions, especially when they're so complex. And of course, we can't forget about data protection. I mean, AI systems are they thrive on data. So we'll explore how to keep all that personal information safe. And even beyond those, we'll also touch on some other things that are becoming increasingly important. Things like how much energy these AI systems use. Sustainability is a big deal. And we'll look at, as AI spreads around the world, how do we make sure it's sensitive to different cultures and values? And lastly, we'll emphasize why it's so important for people from different fields to work together, to collaborate, to make sure AI is developed responsibly. So really what we want to do today is kind of unpack all these, complex considerations and see how they impact society as a whole. So let's jump right in and let's start with fairness. When we say an AI needs to be fair, what does that actually mean in terms of how it works and the outcomes it produces?
Right. At first, fairness in AI seems pretty simple, right? Like just treat everyone the same. But I think as you start to dig deeper, you realize that how these systems are designed and how they learn, that it's so much more complicated than that. It's not just about avoiding, deliberate bias. It's about these unintentional biases, these patterns that the AI might pick up from the data it learns from.
Exactly. The concept of fairness in AI, it really means making sure that these systems don't discriminate, that they don't create unfair outcomes for certain individuals or groups of people. But as you mentioned, the real challenge comes in how these systems learn, because AI at its core learns from data.
Yeah.
And if the data itself reflects, existing inequalities or historical disparities, well, the AI can, without even meaning to, learn those patterns and then just continue to perpetuate them.
That's sort of like, if you were to train a language model just using text written by a specific demographic, right? Then it might really struggle to understand or respond appropriately to the way another group uses language.
That's a great analogy. Think about it. Like, imagine translation software that's been mostly trained on like formal business documents. It would probably have a really hard time accurately translating like, casual conversations or slang that's used in different communities. This really highlights how the data that we feed into AI, it directly shapes what it can do and how it might unintentionally, develop these biases.
Yeah, and it goes beyond just the data itself, right? I
Yeah.
mean, the people who are designing and building these systems, their backgrounds, their perspectives, that all has to play a huge role as well.
Powerfully, having diversity within those teams creating AI is crucial. If you have teams with a wider range of viewpoints, different life experiences, they're more likely to be able to spot potential problems, potential biases, and to design systems that are more, more robust and fair to a wider range of people. Different backgrounds, they bring different insights, they bring different ways of looking at how a system might be perceived, how it might impact various communities. So creating fairer AI, It's not just about carefully selecting data. It's also about building teams that are inclusive and diverse. It sort of raises the question, how do we even begin to define what fair means in all these different applications of AI? Because what's fair in one context, well, it might not be fair in another.
Yeah, that's a huge question. Like, maybe a certain level of error, if an AI is recommending music, maybe that's okay. But that same level of error, if it's a system that's being used for medical diagnoses, that could have really serious consequences.
Which brings us to accountability. Like if an AI system makes a decision that has negative consequences, who do we hold responsible?
That's where this idea of accountability comes in, right? It's about figuring out, where does the responsibility lie for the actions and for the results produced by these AI systems? Is it the developers who built them? Is it the companies who are using them? Maybe even in some cases, could it be the users themselves? It gets really complicated, especially as AI systems become more, sophisticated, more autonomous. It does. I mean, think about those self-driving features that are being put into cars now. If that system, it makes a decision, maybe makes a sudden move that leads to an accident, who's at fault? Is it the person who wrote the code for that specific situation, or the car company that designed the whole system?
Yep.
Or is it the driver who was, ultimately in control of the car? I mean, it's just this really tangled web of potential responsibility.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And because of that, there's this growing conversation happening right now. People are saying we need clear guidelines, maybe even regulations, to figure out who's accountable in all these different situations where AI is involved. Because without that, without some kind of framework, it's really hard to address, any harm that AI might cause, intentionally or not. It makes it difficult to learn from those mistakes, and it makes it really hard for the public to trust this technology.
So it's not even just about like figuring out who to blame after something bad happens. It's about having, from the very beginning, when an AI project starts, having clear expectations and saying, okay, you're responsible for this and you're responsible for that.
Exactly. We need proactive measures,
Mm.
right? Things like testing these systems rigorously to find potential weak points and being really clear about roles and responsibilities, throughout the entire life of an AI project from development to deployment. We can't just keep saying, "Oh, well, the AI did it." We need to have clear lines of accountability, so that humans can supervise and intervene if necessary. I mean, if you think about the big picture, if we don't do this, well, people are just going to lose trust in AI, and that could really hold it back, even in areas where it could do a lot of good.
Yeah. And trust is such a key part of all this, which kind of naturally brings us to this next area, transparency. If we're going to be relying on AI systems for increasingly important decisions, shouldn't we at least have some idea of how they're arriving at those decisions? Because especially with some of these advanced AI models, these deep learning networks, it can feel like we're just looking at like a black box. We have no idea what's happening inside.
You've hit the nail on the head there. Transparency in AI, it really means that the process, the steps that an AI system takes to make a decision, that should be understandable to the people who are using it and the people who are affected by those decisions. And this is a big challenge. I mean, especially with these really complex AI models, but it's absolutely essential if we want people to trust AI
Yeah.
and to be able to make, informed decisions about how it's used.
So it's not necessarily that we need to be able to trace every single, mathematical calculation that's happening inside this huge neural network, but it's more about understanding the key things that the AI is looking at and the general logic that it's using, to come to a conclusion.
Right. If AI is being used for decisions that can really impact people's lives, like medical diagnoses or loan approvals, people have a right to know how that decision was made. They need to be able to understand the AI's reasoning so they can, double check it, look for potential errors or biases, and ultimately make their own informed decisions. And there's a lot of research going into this, trying to make these complex models more interpretable. There are techniques like LIME and S-shape, which can give us some insight into what features, what pieces of information were most important in leading the AI to a particular prediction. They have their limitations, but they're a step in the right direction.
It also seems like, transparency allows us to question AI, to challenge it when something seems off. Because if we have no idea how it reached a decision, it's really hard to argue against it, even if we think it's wrong.
That's exactly it. Transparency gives us a sense of control, you know? It allows us to step in, to identify problems, to fix them, and to hold people accountable, like we were just talking about. And in many fields, industries that are regulated, being able to explain how decisions are made, that's often a legal or ethical requirement. What's interesting here is there's sometimes this trade-off. You want an AI model that's complex because that often means it's more accurate. But the more complex it gets, the harder it is to understand. So finding that balance, it's something that researchers are actively working on.
It's a delicate balance for sure. Now, another area where AI is handling really sensitive stuff is data protection.
Yeah.
With all this data being collected and analyzed, how do we ensure that people's personal information, their privacy, is protected?
Protecting data, keeping it private and secure, that's absolutely crucial in this age of AI because these systems, they need data, often huge amounts of it, and a lot of times that data is very personal. So, we need strong security measures. And we need to make sure that people understand what data is being collected, how it's going to be used, and they need to give their consent, their informed consent.
Informed consent, that's a key part of it, right? It's not enough for companies to just collect data because they can. People have a right to know what's being collected, how it will be used, and they need to have a real say in that process.
Absolutely. They need to understand, what's happening with their data, be able to correct it if it's wrong, and in many cases, they should be able to say, hey, delete my data. Regulations like the GDPR, the General Data Protection Regulation in Europe, those are really important. They set standards for data privacy, not just for AI, but really for everything digital. And the GDPR, it requires companies to think about privacy from the very beginning, to design their systems and processes with privacy in mind.
The GDPR, that felt like a pretty big moment when it came out. It seemed like it gave people more control over their data in a world that's just getting more and more digital, a world driven by AI and data analytics.
Yeah, it's been a kind of a benchmark globally. It really highlights how important it is to build those privacy protections right into the foundation of AI systems, rather than trying to tack them on later as an afterthought. And think about it, if we don't make data protection a priority, well, there's a real risk of misuse. There's a risk of data breaches, and that could have serious consequences. It erodes public trust, and it could even stifle innovation.
Absolutely. So we've covered fairness, accountability, transparency, and data protection. Those seem like the big four, the key considerations. But but our outline, it also points to some broader areas. Let's talk about the energy that AI consumes, the whole sustainability issue. How does that factor into our ethical thinking?
That's becoming a really important part of the conversation. Building and running some of these AI systems, especially the really big machine learning models, it takes a lot of computing power, and that means a lot of energy. We have to think about the environmental impact of everything we do, and AI is no exception. We need to find ways to make our algorithms more efficient, use hardware that's less energy intensive, and just be mindful of the overall resources that AI projects are consuming.
It's not the first thing that comes to mind when you think about AI, right? But
Yeah.
but when you consider the size of some of these models, the computing power that's needed just to train them, the energy usage has to be significant. I remember reading something about how, training some of these large language models, it has a carbon footprint that's equivalent to like multiple transatlantic flights.
It's true. And that really shows you the scale of the energy demands we're talking about. As AI becomes more common, more widespread, the total environmental impact, it's going to be considerable.
Yeah.
So responsible AI development, it also means being committed to sustainability, finding more eco-friendly approaches. There are techniques like federated learning where you train models on data that's spread out, decentralized.
Right.
And there's research going on into designing AI architectures that are just more efficient. These are steps in the right direction.
That makes sense. Now, another thing to think about is that, AI is being used in all sorts of different societies around the world, each with their own unique culture, their own values. How can we make sure that AI works well and that it's, respectful of these different contexts?
You're talking about cultural sensitivity, and it's a really important concept. What's considered appropriate or effective for an AI system in one culture might be completely different in another. So developers, they need to be really aware of different cultural norms, different languages, social customs, values, all of these things when they're designing AI systems that are going to be used globally.
So it's more than just like translating the user interface into different languages. It's about, really understanding the underlying cultural assumptions and how the AI's behavior might be perceived. I mean, something that might seem funny, a humorous interaction in one culture could be totally offensive in another.
That's exactly right. It requires a deep understanding of the context, engaging with communities, maybe even customizing AI systems to better fit those specific cultural expectations. A one-size-fits-all approach is just not going to work. It could lead to unintended negative consequences, or people in certain cultures might just not trust the technology.
And finally, our outline talks about interdisciplinary collaboration. It sounds like, to really address all of these complex issues, you need input from a lot of different experts.
Absolutely. To develop frameworks for responsible AI, we need everyone at the table. We need computer scientists, of course, and engineers, but we also need ethicists who can, help us understand the moral principles involved. We need social scientists who can study the impact on society. We need legal experts to navigate the laws and regulations, and we need experts from all the different fields where AI is being used, people who understand the specific needs and challenges of those areas.
It's like each discipline has its own unique perspective, its own lens for viewing these complex issues. Like the technologists, they know what's possible, what AI can do, but the ethicists, they can raise the really important questions about, well, what are the consequences of doing those things? What are the implications?
That's a great way to put it. This cross-pollination of ideas, of perspectives,
Hmm.
it's absolutely crucial. It's how we're going to identify the challenges, come up with good solutions, and make sure that AI is developed and used in a way that that benefits everyone, that benefits society as a whole.
Hmm.
If we don't have that collaboration, well, we risk developing AI in a vacuum, and that could mean overlooking some really critical societal and ethical considerations.
Right. And speaking of developments, there are some really interesting things happening in the field, like the idea that AI algorithms themselves could be designed to spot and maybe even fix unfair outcomes. That's a pretty fascinating concept.
It really is. They're trying to build these fairness metrics right into the AI models, into the training process itself. The goal is to give AI systems the ability to assess themselves, to see if they're being biased, and then adjust how they make decisions so that the outcomes are more fair, more equitable across different groups of people. This involves, coming up with mathematical definitions of what fairness actually means and creating algorithms that can, optimize for fairness during the training process.
So it's like you're trying to build in these checks and balances from the start, right? To prevent or at least reduce unfairness in what the AI produces. It sounds like a huge step forward.
Yeah, it's a really active area of research right now. And there's still a lot of challenges, a lot of debate about, the best way to define fairness in AI and how to actually achieve it. But these efforts to embed these fairness considerations directly into the technology itself, they're really promising.
Definitely. And then there's this whole push for, more interpretable AI models. We were talking about transparency before, but this idea of explainable AI, it seems like it's really gaining momentum.
It is. There's a growing realization that, especially for AI systems that are used in these really important applications, where the stakes are high, that they need to be able to explain their decisions.
Hmm.
So researchers are working on new AI architectures, new techniques that can give us some insight into why the AI made a particular prediction or recommendation.
Hmm.
Because ultimately we need to understand that reasoning, that why behind the AI's output, if we're going to trust it, if we're going to be able to hold it accountable, and if we're going to be able to catch potential errors or biases.
It's moving beyond just getting an answer from the AI, right? It's about understanding the thought process, the logic that led to that answer. And that's essential if we're going to have human oversight,
Yeah.
if we're going to make truly informed decisions.
Exactly. Explainable AI, it's not just about making the AI understandable for the people who are using it. It's also about giving the developers, the people who build these systems, better tools so they can debug, so they can improve their models and
Yeah.
make sure those models are really working the way they're supposed to, that they're not just picking up on random patterns in the data that don't really mean anything.
It really highlights that the goal of AI development, it's not just about making AI more powerful, it's about making it more responsible, making it truly beneficial for society. So to kind of bring it all together, what would you say is the most important takeaway from our discussion today?
I think the biggest takeaway is this. As AI becomes more intertwined with our lives, more integrated into everything we do, we have to be proactive. We have to think about these different aspects. Fairness, accountability, transparency, data protection. These aren't just ethical nice-to-haves, they're essential. If we want to build AI systems that are trustworthy and that ultimately benefit everyone, we have to consider these things from the very beginning. By doing that, we can keep innovating, we can push the boundaries of what AI can do, but we can also reduce the risks and make sure that AI is used to make the world a better, a more equitable place.
It's like, we need to be shaping AI with these principles in mind from the start, not trying to fix problems after they pop up. That seems like a really crucial distinction. So, just to recap quickly, we talked about fairness in AI, how important it is. We talked about the need for clear lines of accountability, the value of transparency so we can understand how AI is making decisions, and the crucial role of protecting data and privacy. And we also touched on sustainability, cultural sensitivity, and the power of bringing together experts from different fields. It's a lot to think about, and it's a field that's constantly changing.
It really is. We're all learning and adapting as the technology itself keeps advancing.
Which brings us to our final thought for you, our listener. As AI continues to learn and adapt, as it becomes, more and more sophisticated, how will our own understanding of responsibility, of decision making, how will that evolve in this world where we're sharing the stage with these intelligent machines? It's definitely something to ponder. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into AI.